If you're in the needlework community, you've maybe heard the phrase, "not your grandma's cross-stitch." It's usually used to refer to designs that are modern, edgy, or explicit, often with pop culture or subversive motifs. It's funny, right? Because your grandmother's cross-stitch is... what exactly? Old-fashioned? Uninteresting? Prudish? Let's talk about that. Cross-stitch, Craftivism, and the Devaluation of Craftwork. Cross-stitch. Needlework has been used for centuries, not just for home decoration, but to express culture, politics, and resistance. We'll talk more on that later. Cross-stitch is a type of embroidery in which X-shaped stitches, called cross-stitches, are used in a gridded pattern to form a picture. Cross-stitch is to pixel art as pianos are to synthesizers. Traditionally, cross-stitch was used to embellish items like clothing, household linens, tablecloths, dishcloths, and doilies. Most modern patterns are stitched on fabric and hung on the wall as decoration. No single person invented cross-stitch. It emerged independently in different countries around the world, evolving organically over thousands of years. The oldest surviving examples of cross-stitch date back as far as 500 BCE in Egypt. A fragment of linen cloth with cross-stitch-like wool embroidery was found in a Coptic tomb. The dry conditions of Egyptian tombs allowed for the preservation of textiles. In ancient Peru, archaeologists have unearthed needlework samples dated as far back as 200 BCE. This Nazca sample was stitched on cotton using colored camelid hair thread. Tatriz is Palestinian cross-stitch embroidery, widely used in traditional Palestinian dressmaking. Some of the oldest surviving examples date back to 1850, like this coat from Akka in the Galilee, Palestine. This was stitched on indigo-dyed linen in silk thread. According to Hanan Munayer's traditional Palestinian costume, Origins or Evolution, the motifs in Tatriz can be traced back to the Canaanite period, 1500 to 1200 BCE. Embroidery work flourished in China during the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, and was often stitched silk on silk. With the introduction of the Silk Road, cross-stitch designs and methods made their way to Russia and Europe. Europe welcomed this craft with open arms, and through their adoption, saw the explosion of popularity of a particular element of needlework, the sampler. Samplers. Samplers were generally stitched by young girls to learn both stitching and basic literacy. Samplers often included alphabets, numbers, and simple verses, improving education at a time when formal schooling was not always available. The hope was that these women would embody characteristics such as modesty, obedience, and stillness before marriage. The term sampler can be traced back to the Latin word exemplum, or the Old French term exemplaire, meaning an example. The name reflects this function. Samplers also acted as personal pattern libraries, recording designs, techniques, and ideas that the owner had learned or copied. Samplers of the 1500s to 1700s served as permanent records of stitches and designs, intended for reference, unlike later samplers that were planned for display. By the 1500s, printed cross-stitch pattern books and instruction manuals were widely circulated, making the craft more accessible. This example of the Priscilla cross-stitch book from 1899 includes a wide variety of motifs, borders, and alphabets. Jane Bostocke's sampler. The earliest dated British sampler to have survived was made in 1598 by Jane Bostocke in Shropshire, England. The sampler was made to commemorate the birth of her cousin, Alice Lee, 2 years earlier. The text on the sampler reads, Jane Bostocke, 1598. Alice Lee was born the 23rd of November, being Tuesday in the afternoon, 1596. It was stitched on linen in colored silk thread, along with some beadwork and metallic thread. The motifs at the top of the sampler relate to their family crests and depict an owl in a tree, a dog with a collar and lead, a lion, a chained and muzzled bear in a field of daisies, a tree with a squirrel, a crouching deer, a spray of cowslips, and a small dog. You can see 3 small motifs that have been unpicked, which appear to be a castle on an elephant, a raven, and an even smaller dog. The motifs are done in cross-stitch, while the rest of the sampler is filled with geometric and floral patterns worked in backstitch. This sampler is in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Laura Standish's sampler. The oldest known sampler made in the US was stitched in the 1640s by Loara Standish of Plymouth Colony. No record of a formal school survives in Plymouth Colony, so we don't know who taught Loara her alphabet or embroidery, but from the quality of her sampler, she must have been taught by a needlewoman of considerable ability, perhaps her mother or a neighbor. The text in the sampler reads, "Loara Standish is my name, Lord guide my heart, that I may do thy will also. My hands with such convenient skill as may conduce to virtue void of shame, and I will give the glory to thy name." It was stitched on very fine 50-count linen using blue, green, pink, and red silk thread. The sampler is decorated with bands of stylized flowers, roses and carnations, acorns, and intertwined S designs. This sampler is at Pilgrim Hall in Plymouth, Massachusetts. There is a hierarchy in the arts. Decorative art at the bottom and the human form at the top, because we are men. Craftivism. Throughout the history of art, decoration and domestic handicrafts have been regarded as women's work, and because of this, not seen as high or fine art. Godey's Ladies' Book, a popular 1800s women's magazine, often praised embroidery. Not for creativity, but for cultivating patience and refinement, which sends a clear message. The social role of needlework was meant to discipline women, not celebrate their artistry. Needlework has never been considered as a worthy artistic equivalent to sculpture or painting. How many famous paintings or sculptures can you name off the top of your head? Can you name a single piece of needlework? I haven't seen any in my New Horizons museum. Enter Craftivism. It is exactly what it sounds like, using crafting to express political or social messages and promote change. Crafting, activism, Craftivism. The term was coined by knitter and activist Betsy Greer in 2003 to describe the reclamation of traditional female hobbies to advocate for social change. But craftivism was happening long before we came up with a term for it, so let's talk about that. The Oxburgh Hangings. The Oxburgh Hangings are a set of embroidered panels made between 1570 and 1585 by Mary, Queen of Scots, while she was imprisoned in England by her cousin, Elizabeth I. In 1568, Mary fled to England after being forced from her throne. She hoped her cousin Elizabeth would protect her, but instead Elizabeth saw her as a threat with a rival claim to the crown. Mary was placed under house arrest, where she would spend the next 18 years. Her movements were tightly restricted. She wasn't allowed outdoors unsupervised, and every letter she wrote was monitored. Embroidery was a form of therapy and communication for Mary. The panels produced by Mary during this period demonstrate the resistance of a woman with few other ways to assert control. To the knowing eye, the images she chose often carried coded meanings. Her motifs of plants, animals, and symbolic figures can be read as reflections on her captivity, her lineage, and her political position. The hangings were stitched on coarsely woven linen using colored silks and metallic threads. Many of Mary's motifs were lifted from popular illustrated books of the time. This panel shows a cat with a crown playing with a mouse. The cat was big and ginger and is thought to represent Elizabeth I. The cat is restricting the mouse, trapping it from freedom and escape, which could be interpreted as how Mary felt about her situation. The figure of the cat is taken from a woodcut in Icones Animalium by Conrad Gesner, an illustrated natural history book published in Zurich in 1555. In the panels on the Marian hanging, a marigold, a name derived from Mary's gold, turning towards the sun could indicate courage in adversity, and a yellow rose attacked by the canker, a group of caterpillars, suggests the devouring feeling of despair. The central panel depicts a grapevine and a hand holding a pruning knife. Some historians think this references Mary's claim to the throne, suggesting the need to cut away the fruitless branch of the Tudor tree represented by the childless and illegitimate Elizabeth. The point is driven home by the Latin motto, Viricit vulnere virtus, virtue flourishes by wounding. The Earl of Shrewsbury mentions in a letter that she useth to sit working with the needle, in which she much delighteth, and in devising works, and her talk is altogether of indifferent trifling matters, presenting this as an innocent domestic activity not likely to result in conspiracy or sedition. The nature of the surviving emblems, however, tells a different story. The hangings are now part of the Victoria and Albert Museum collection, although they are on permanent long-time loan at Oxburgh Hall. Elizabeth Parker's Sampler. Elizabeth Parker lived in Ashburnham in Sussex, England. She was the daughter of a local labourer, one of 11 children. In 1830, as a teenager, she created an unusual sampler. Instead of flowers, alphabets, or Bible verses, hers is filled entirely with text. It begins, "As I cannot write, I put this down simply and freely as I might speak to a person to whose intimacy and tenderness I can fully entrust myself, and who I know will bear with all my weaknesses." She tells us that she was born in 1813 and that at 13, she left home to work as a nursery maid. She writes of her weaknesses and sins. She also describes how her employers treated her with cruelty too horrible to mention and how she was tempted to kill herself. As the text continues, her desperation increases. Which way can I turn, wretch that I am? What will become of me? Until she breaks off mid-sentence, what will become of my soul? This piece is a diary. This was a time when samplers were expected of young women to show off their skills for marriage and to strengthen their bond with God, when mental health was far from understood. Elizabeth pours her heart out into this piece. The design is thought through, her words are well chosen, and the design clearly intentional. Her placement of nothing but red silk letters on white linen is impactful. Her choice to end the passage with "What will become of my soul," followed by a large blank space, urges the reader to ponder on what happened to her. So a quick editor's note here. Since I recorded this, it's been really bugging me that on the V&A site, all it says is, in 1998, an English historian discovered details of who she was and of her family. An American historian has uncovered new information. This is so vague, and I wanted to record their names for posterity. In 1992, British historian Nigel Llewellyn was researching exhibitions at the V&A and was shown Elizabeth Parker's sampler. Llewellyn was so struck that he researched East Sussex records to firmly establish the identity of Elizabeth Parker. He wrote about Elizabeth and her sampler in his piece, Elizabeth Parker's Sampler, Memory, Suicide, and the Presence of the Artist, for the book Material Memories, Design and Evocation, published in 1999. He had found her parents in the parish registers, but wrote that little is known about the other figures in her life or what happened to her. In the winter 2002 edition of Sampler and Antique Needlework Quarterly, there was an article by Maureen Daly Goggin titled One Englishwoman's Story in Silken Ink, filling in the missing strands in Elizabeth Parker's circa 1830 sampler. In it, Goggin steps in to flesh out the details. This article is an incredible piece of investigative journalism and is almost impossible to find online, so I've put it on screen so you can pause if you'd like. Elizabeth's story did not end there. Historical research shows she became a school teacher in Ashburnham and raised her sister's daughter. She never married. Her sampler is now in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Patty Polk and Edith-Anne. In 2016, Edith-Anne's sampler went viral. It reads, Edith-Anne did this in 1848 and hated every stitch. Cute, right? The only problem is Edith-Anne doesn't exist. This piece was made by a modern stitcher, Judy Estep, who published samplers under the pseudonym Edith-Anne in the 1990s. Now, the only place I could find this information was in this article written by Emily Wells, so I did what any good video essayist would do and sent an email. And I got a response. Emily was able to confirm that on some pieces, Judy signed her full name, and even shared a screenshot of a Facebook comment of a Judy Estep claiming the identity of Edith-Anne. While the pattern was a fake, it was inspired by this one, which wasn't. In the 1921 collection, American Samplers by Ethel Stanwood Bolton and Eva Johnston Coe, there's a record of a sampler by Patty Polk, a 10-year-old girl from Maryland in the early 1800s. She stitched an unusual needlework picture while attending school. Patty stitched a floral border with roses, passion flowers, nasturtiums, and at the center, a tomb to George Washington surrounded by forget-me-nots. This was not an unusual composition. What was unusual was the inscription. Patty Polk did this, and she hated every stitch she did in it. She loves to read much more. Two competing perspectives on samplers arose from the discussion. With samplers being a historically oppressive craft, do we embrace the subversion of traditional messaging? Or are samplers a way to reclaim an under-recognized form of feminine creativity? In other words, was Patty a subversive icon, or was she anti-feminist by rejecting feminine craft? In The Subversive Stitch, Embroidery and the Making of the Feminine, Rosika Parker argues that the art of embroidery has been the means of educating women in the feminine ideal, and of proving that they have attained it, but it has also provided a weapon of resistance to the constraints of femininity. The Casdagli Sampler. The Casdagli Sampler was created by British Army officer Major Alexis Casdagli in 1941. He was captured and imprisoned by the German forces early in the Second World War. With little to do but occupy their time, many prisoners turned to cross-stitch as a way to pass the time. After 6 months, Alexis was handed a piece of canvas by a fellow inmate. He borrowed red and blue thread from an old pullover belonging to a Greek general, and began stitching. The central field of the sampler was a simple inscription stating, "This work was done by Major A.T. Casdagli, number 3311, while in captivity at Dosel-Warburg, Germany, December 1941. The text was framed by swastikas, for Germany, eagles for the USA, lions for Britain, and the hammer and sickle for the Soviet Union. Around the outer edge, Casdagli stitched a border of irregular dots and dashes. Impressed with the captive officer's needlework, the Germans put it on display in various POW camps in Germany. It would appear that his captors never deciphered the messages written in Morse code. God save the king, and fuck Hitler. During his captivity, Casdagli ran a needlework school for the other officers in the POW camps. He later said that the Red Cross saved his life with food parcels and letters, but his embroidery saved his sanity. If you sit down and stitch, you can forget about other things, and it's very calming. Today, his sampler and others by him and his son Antony remain in the Casdagli family collection. Modern activists. Subversive cross-stitch. The 21st century has its own movement of subversive designs. Artists began pairing traditional sampler aesthetics with sayings and imagery designed to be shocking, humorous, or incongruous. These pieces often feature witty quotes, feminist statements, or humorous observations rendered with delicate borders of flowers and animals. The movement is widely credited to Julie Jackson, who launched her brand Subversive Cross-Stitch in 2003. Her designs for Hell is Other People and Dance Like Everyone Can Go Fuck Themselves are great examples of her style. Other designers have followed suit with patterns like Night Spirit Studios' Please Don't Summon Demons in the Bathroom, and Studio in Sitru's Punch Your Local Nazi pattern. Aram Sifuentes Sampler. The US Citizenship Test Sampler is a project begun in 2012 by artist Aram Sifuentes. It is a sampler embroidered with all of the 100 questions and answers from the US Citizenship and Naturalization Test. Han's sampler is made from a 7.62 meter long piece of linen and worked with cotton threads. When completed, the embroidered work will be sold for US $760, the cost of applying for naturalization. Han, an immigrant from South Korea, has stated that they will apply for US citizenship only if the sampler sells, letting others decide if I've proven my worthiness of becoming a citizen. Han is recording how many hours of work are going into the sampler. By mid-2015, they had completed 53 questions, totaling over 250 hours of work. Through this, Han highlights how both needlework and immigrant labor are undervalued in US society. The sampler has been exhibited at various institutions, including the Jane Addams Hull House Museum, where it sparked discussions on immigration, civic engagement, and what it means to belong in the United States. The project is ongoing and also invites contributions from other non-US citizens, allowing them to add their own samplers to the collection. The Craftivist Collective. Founded in 2009 by Sarah Corbett, the Craftivist Collective was built on the belief of gentle protest, a mindful approach to activism that uses handcrafted works to inspire reflection and change. Sarah, a self-proclaimed burnt-out activist, disliked the image of the aggressive activist but wanted to do something to create change. One point of her Craftivist manifesto reads, "Use the slow, stitch-by-stitch nature of craft to help you consider the complexities of injustices. It will lead to a deeper understanding of them and their solutions." Their campaigns have led to significant outcomes, such as persuading Marks & Spencer to adopt the living wage for its employees. Marks & Spencer, a major UK retailer, was not paying its employees a living wage, leading to financial insecurity for many workers. In April 2015, Corbett and her Craftivist Collective Googled the hell out of each of M&S's board members in order to make them personalized, hand-embroidered handkerchiefs. The group presented them as gifts at the company's annual meeting. They sewed on hopeful messages, encouraging the company to pay their staff fairly. The campaign garnered attention and praise from M&S board members, and 10 months later, the company made significant changes to their wages. Badass Cross-Stitch. Shannon Downey, aka Badass Cross-Stitch, is an American crafter and activist who uses cross-stitch to challenge societal norms and spark conversation. Shannon got back into cross-stitching after feeling burnt out from a decade in digital marketing. Which, mood. In 2016, Shannon started working on a project about gun violence. Shannon started with this piece, a gun filled with florals and French knots, and gradually added more to the series. A few weeks later, Shannon invited their followers to join in and make their own gun violence-related patterns, providing a free pattern template on their website. While working on the project, a bullet shattered her home window from a drive-by shooter. Luckily, no one was harmed. Shannon began to receive pieces submitted for the exhibition. The pieces sold at the gallery raised $5,000 for Project Fire, an anti-violence nonprofit. Shannon has since continued to make pieces dedicated to ending gun violence. One of Shannon's most famous pieces, Boys Will Be Boys, was a reaction to the 2016 Access Hollywood tape featuring Donald Trump. The piece, which reads, "Boys will be held accountable for their fucking actions," went viral. Shannon had another piece go viral in 2017. A stitched protest sign for the Women's March reading, "I'm so angry I stitched this just so I could stab something 3,000 times." Shannon has also initiated projects that foster community and collective action. In 2019, they started Badass Her Story, a public art and digital project aiming to collect 1 million stories of women, female-identifying, and gender non-conforming people, submitted in any 12-inch by 12-inch art form. The project is ongoing, with submissions regularly displayed in galleries and online. Why does everything have to be political? Needlework has never just been about making something pretty. It's been a form of social commentary, protest, and personal expression for centuries. In the wake of the women's liberation movement in the 60s, feminist artists wanted to revive women's craft and decorative art as valued means of expression of the female experience. Many 1970s feminist artists sought to elevate women's craft to the level of high art, and away from its derogatory designation as domestic or kitsch. In a 1973 essay, art critic and activist Lucy Lippard discusses how previously women artists had avoided female techniques like sewing, weaving, knitting, ceramics, even the use of pastel colors, pink, and delicate lines for fear of being labeled feminine artists. Journalist E. Tammy Kim writes that fabric arts such as embroidery tend to become more popular in times when women are feeling particularly pissed off. To take up the needle, she writes, is to reclaim our histories of anonymous, poorly paid, and unpaid female craft, garment labor, and piecework. Craft has always been part of public debates on voting, abolition, government, and reconciliation. Calling it just a hobby is part of the historical devaluation of labor. Cross-stitch takes time and deliberate attention. It is a physical manifestation of the care, grief, anger, and identity of the stitcher. It is something that can be both beautiful and angry. Cross-stitch today is hugely popular and diverse. There are an endless amount of patterns available in magazines, books, and online. People of all genders continue to use cross-stitch to create both decorative and subversive forms of art. It's a way that anyone can relieve their stress and channel their rage. So with all that said, why is the phrase, "not your grandma's cross-stitch," problematic? There is implied ageism and sexism in the words, casting a sneer on women's skills and punching down older generations. It frames grandma's craft as lame, passé, last week's news. When you pick up your needle today, you're participating in the same fundamental act as Elizabeth Parker pouring her heart out, or Patty Polk snarking at an assignment. Cross-stitch carries with it over 2,500 years of human expression. Why do we feel the need to knock our grandmothers down a peg in order to carve our own path? Grandmas grew up in eras of sexual revolution and activism. Yes, modern stitchers are bringing in new motifs and commentary, but we stand on the shoulders of stitchers before us. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. If you'd like more edutainment content, check out my previous video, Nature Isn't Binary. Happy stitching and have a great day. I haven't seen any in my New Horizons museum. Jakey. Honey, why are we yelling? Come here. You want to come say hi? Why are we yelling? Oh, so. Yes, hello. Who's yelling? You want to say hi?